Your book's up there.
Oh, sorry. Thank you.
Yep. Yeah, it was very good. And they're going to be posting it just in a few. Yeah, thanks.
Welcome. All right. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for being here. I'd like to call the April 23rd, 2019 special meeting to order. Madam Clerk?
Mayor Silva?
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Fitzgerald? Here. Councilmember Flory? Here. Councilmember Whitaker?
Here.
Councilmember Zara?
Here. Perfect. And we will now do our invocation. Is Pastor Villagana here? Is he here? There he is. All right. Pastor Fernando Villagana, thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council. Thank you. I want to say thank you for the opportunity to be able to open up in prayer like this. And before I pray, I owe all of you an apology. I was scheduled to be here 2 weeks ago, and I was at City Council, but it was Braille. 2 lessons I learned. Number 1, read the full email. And number 2, as an excuse, I guess, no brains, no headaches, right? So that's one thing I don't have to worry about. But thank you very much. Let's bow our heads as we pray. Father, we pray your blessing because your word declares many times we have not simply because we ask not. So as an invocation, we ask for your presence to be here with us. We pray a special blessing upon all of our leadership, our mayor, members of the City Council. And God, we pray a blessing over all the people that make decisions here, the people that have opinions here. We pray, God, that you would help us to be able to articulate these things in a way that would cause unity and a common goal. We thank you, God, for your many blessings. We thank you for our first responders who, without accolades or special recognition, put their life in harm's way each and every day. We pray over the agenda. We pray over the citizens of this great city. And again, God, that we would be directed by you, that we would hear your voice, whether it be a still small voice or a loud and clear voice, that we would not be driven but led by the Spirit of God. And so we thank you and we praise you in the name of our Lord and Savior. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Councilmember Zara, would you please lead us in the pledge?
I'd be happy to. Face the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you.
Okay, and do any council members have any ex parte communication to report out? All right, seeing none. And at this time, we would normally have public comments, but we're going to allow public comments after our presentation this evening. So with that, we would open it up to council members for any reports, any comments before we get started?
Not tonight.
Nope. All right. So then at this time, we are going to, Mr. City Manager, you're going to take it over?
Sure, I'll take it over for
proceed?
just a real quick session. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council, and those in attendance tonight and watching on the broadcast of this. This is a strategic planning session. We do have an outside facilitator, Ellen Roeder, who was the interim city manager here in Fullerton, has also been the interim city manager in Garden Grove, and was a longtime city manager in the city of Costa Mesa. Strategic planning is very important to a process. We started a little bit of this a little over a year ago and are continuing this. Ultimately, what would be great is to have a full strategic planning session one day where we look at what's called a SWOT analysis, which is a strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, and that's something for the council and the community to identify, and it helps move us forward in our budgeting process. So with that, tonight we're going to start off everything with a presentation by our Administrative Services Director, Michael O'Kelly, who's going to give us a quick overview on the third quarter financial report, and then a preliminary look at our 2019-20 budget numbers, and more importantly, a look at our 5-year and extended outlook, like a 20-year financial outlook, to lead the evening, and then that will be turned over to Ellen Roeder to facilitate the strategic planning process.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
if I may, a point of order. Since the council has been having difficulty adhering to an agenda recently, I would like to point out that we do have public comments delineated on this agenda, and that was posted in the notice. So I don't really see an overwhelming crowd here this evening. I think it would be more appropriate for us to go ahead and take public comments as the agenda dictates, unless the council wants to entertain a vote to the contrary.
And Mr. Mayor, members of council, if I may, if there's public comments now, it would be on items not on the agenda. During the agenda item number itself, the public comments are at the end of the discussion on the city council discussion, so that the public can comment on some of the items and ideas that the city council generated during that discussion. So whatever your action is appropriate.
All right, well, I like to proceed with our discussion and, again, make it available for public comments after, just so we can get to the meat of the order. And since Mr. Whitaker made this point, Ms. Attorney, can we vote to just hold public comments after? Or because it's on the agenda as first, do we need to go ahead and do the public comments now?
No, I mean, you have discretion to move public comments to the end. And in fact, because this is a special meeting, items or public comments can be limited to the agenda item.
Okay. Well, in that case, would
The only people who are really put out are those who came to make public comments early in the meeting.
right.
And now, I guess, I don't know whether this will be a 2-hour meeting or more, right?
Right.
So it continues this, I guess, lack of adhering to a routine on this council. That was my argument. I certainly don't have public comments to make,
Right.
but there are people who might have come here. There's also going to be some confusion. I think it'll be disjointed during the presentation, because even though we've got all areas of the city covered here, we really don't have all topics covered with this. So it makes it a little bit difficult for the public to determine where their public comments may fit.
Okay. All right, then. Well,
But as long as we're willing to accept that disjointedness and be at least forgiving for members of the public who want to get their say wherever they can do that.
Well, I would hopefully like to move forward with our presentation, and hopefully they can forgive our changing this the item public comments to the end.
Mayor Silva,
yes.
Could I suggest that we ask our city clerk how many speaker requests we have?
Madam Clerk?
I have 4 slips. 1, 2. Looks like 3 of them are marked for public comment, and 1 looks like it's marked for the study session item.
Yeah, that doesn't seem too daunting. I can support Councilmember Whitaker's request.
It's fine with me too, but I do want to register my disagreement that this council can't adhere to agenda, because we do so every time we meet.
Yes, and I would also agree that when you mentioned disjointed, I was trying to recall when we've skipped items, and so
Brown Act issues is what I was making reference to.
Yeah, and I don't think we have Brown Act issues either. So.
all right. Then, well, then since we've got a few council members willing to do that, let's open it up. Then those of you that submitted public comment forms, please come up, and we'll take those now.
Thank you, Mayor Silva. I'm Chris Norby at 2800 Puente Street in Fullerton. And I'm here to address Hillcrest Park and hopefully be helpful in continuing the improvements that have been made to the park. I remember the 1980s were a bad time for Hillcrest Park. On-street parking in and around the park was banned to discourage so-called undesirables. But now with the park's renaissance and extensive upgrades and newfound popularity, I think this parking should be restored. On Easter Sunday, just 2 days ago, my son and I drove through Hillcrest Park and found large family gatherings, but there was no place for us to park or even legally stop. 3 areas of concern. The fountain. There are only 3 parking spaces at the newly restored fountain area. If we restored parking on both sides of Valley View, this would improve access for those currently forced to park across the street in the Ralph's parking lot. Isaac Walton Cabin. I spoke to Isaac Walton President Gene Walton, and he says that whenever they have events there at the cabin, people are forced to park illegally there in the park access road, risking tickets, since parking was banned there about 30 years ago. Legally, they can only park at a few isolated lots in the area, and so I would strongly urge us to move forward and look at allowing parking once again on those access roads within the park, especially near the cabin. And finally, the scenic jogging stairways. I'm not sure what else to call them, but those beautiful new lit stairways in the back of the park. Those 10 spots fill up very, very quickly. And also, by the way, the official sunset closing hours create some confusion among joggers since the stairways are lit all night. But I think if we restored parking on both sides of Lemon Street, this would improve access to those stairways, and would also improve access to the rec center and the picnic areas there near the tot lot. Hillcrest Park has been restored to its proper place in our community, and now we need to move forward and restore parking needed for the full enjoyment of the park. We don't need new lots. We just need to restripe and remove the no parking signs. In summary, let the public park in the public park. I'd be happy to meet with any of you personally or staff as you direct, or be a part of any further discussion as we move forward with the improvements of the park, which I know are not finished, and these are an important part of that. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
Thank you for letting me speak.
Good evening, Council. Dan Lancaster, President of Fullerton Firefighter Association. Luckily for you guys, I'm a better firefighter than public speaker, so I'm going to just try to keep it short and to the point tonight. I represent what's left of the firefighting workforce here in the city of Fullerton, and as everybody knows, that retention issues have been plaguing us over the last few years. Tonight we're going to be discussing a lot of big issues when it comes to city planning and strategy moving forward. Your firefighters are in dire need of some change, and we're looking to council for some big decisions in support of our new fire chief. This council appointed our fire chief for a reason, and we're hoping that everything that he brings to the table that this council is truly going to look at and take to heart when they talk about the budget in the upcoming years. I know right now your firefighters are under contract, And that contract was based on just providing the best service we could provide with what the city was willing to pay for. We have paramedic services, not where we need to be, but with the help of our fire chief and the Firefighters Association, we know we can get this place to where we need to be. Right now, the city of Fullerton has lost more firefighters than any other agency in the county. We've lost 26 firefighters since 2016. And that's just, it's unprecedented for us to go through so many bodies, and at such a cost to the city. Almost $2 million have been spent on hiring, training, and losing firefighters in the past 5 years. And it's got to stop. We have to reinvest back into our fire department. And given the opportunity, I know our new fire chief, Adam Lozier, and the new Firefighter Association can put together a plan where we can reinvest fire revenues back into our pocket to right the ship. We are a very talented, very aggressive fire department, and we are very proudful to serve the community we are. Hold on to us. Take care of the employee that's taking care of you guys every single day. That's all we're asking. The past is the past. The fire department is ready to move forward. We are under new management. We are ready to come together with council, with our city manager, to come to a positive end. We need to focus on making tomorrow better than today when it comes to public safety. And right now, we can't get it done when all we're doing is being the training ground for our surrounding agencies. Your fire department is crumbling beneath you, and we need you to take action as soon as possible. Allow your fire chief to do his job and right the ship. We're willing to put in the effort. We've been putting in the effort day in and day out for years, only to watch our brothers and sisters go off to other departments for better pay and benefits. We are not a broke city, and your fire department is not trying to break the bank. We're just trying to stay competitive. Thank you, City Manager, for listening to us last month. Thank you, Councilmember Zara. And I know the rest of the council, if we can sit down and get a conversation and come up with a plan based on where we feel we need to be, where our fire chief feels we need to be, we can right the ship. Thank you for your time. Good luck with the decisions you have.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. My name is Ian Timmons, and I am the current president for the Fullerton Municipal Employees Federation. The Fullerton Municipal Employees Federation, or FMEF, is the largest bargaining unit within the city of Fullerton. We are a wide-ranging unit. We have members in PD, Fire, City Hall, the library, and the Public Works Yard. From March of 2017 to the present day, the FMEF alone has had approximate 20% reduction in its membership. The city continues to struggle with employee retention, a large portion being from our unit. Each loss impacts the services we provide, adds additional work to our members, and could be potentially hazardous to our residents. We know that our work is not as glamorous as police and fire. However, we do believe that it is necessary, and if not more important in certain aspects. An example of this is when we lose our maintenance workers. These are the people that repair your water mains, fix our potholes, and work outside of their job duties to clean homeless encampments. The city spends thousands of dollars and hundreds of man-hours to train and certify them, simply to see them take their training and experience elsewhere. Our own staff at times recommends leaving in order to continue to grow in careers and financial security. As we lose these members, a ripple effect is felt. With less staff, fewer potholes are filled, permits take longer, and more claims are generated, requiring additional assistance. The longer a CIP takes, the more water mains break. The more people have to work on emergency shifts, and the longer residents don't have water. It's not a wonder to us why we're losing people to other cities. Many of us have families to support, and many other cities see the value in our employees. Our employees are a gold mine for other cities. The city cannot expect to achieve its financial goals, let alone grow and thrive, only by reducing employee compensation, benefits, and CalPERS liabilities. We are quickly approaching the point where additional reductions will be counterproductive and result in even greater staff turnover. The additional loss of more high-performing employees leads to an inevitable decrease in productivity. The Federation's perspective on the priorities in the survey that was provided is our ability to retain exceptional employees affects 90% of what was on that list, and according to that stakeholders. That being said, we do have our mission statement. Our mission statement is to provide exemplary support to our city departments and the Fullerton community by offering strategic and innovative services, using and supporting our exceptional staff while maintaining our community's values. Our vision statement, to provide an employment environment where existing employees are valued, respected, and rewarded for their hard work and conscientious service to the city, and where qualified, trained, and skilled job seekers consider the city of Fullerton a great opportunity for a career and not as just a simple stepping stone on the pathway. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just a few rebuttals. One, this council does have meeting problems, as was noticed last meeting when two council members argued with the city attorney over what they could and couldn't do, and also when the whole issue about the appointment of Ms. Forey had to be re-agendized owing to a Brown Act violation that was pointed out. You can read the city manager updates if you don't want to see that. It wasn't admitted, but it was re-agendized, argued if you want. Next, the idea that we don't pay people enough. I'd like everyone to look at Transparent California and look at the actual numbers and the math and the CalPERS actuary numbers, and also look at our own CAFR, which will be lightly talked about tonight, and how we don't have a balanced budget and a structural deficit because we don't fund employees. We don't fund vacancies. So there's a lot of actual sort of mythology that goes on with the we underpay. It's a market issue. The idea that, okay, well, we have to pay people more or they'll go elsewhere. Well, if other cities paid less, they wouldn't flee. And you can't say as a city employee that you're loyal to the city when you jump ship the minute somebody offers you more money. We have a structural deficit. We can't just pull money out of the air. Otherwise, you wouldn't be having a meeting tonight with a vision and mission statement and other such sort of laughable nonsense about how to run a government. We don't have the money to pay what everybody in this room wants. It's just not real. If you guys are really serious about this budgetary issues, then open up the contracts, let everybody see how it's debated, and actually talk about real options. Talk about what we can contract out, what we can't contract out, what services can be split. Maybe talk about the overtime that's accrued and how much overtime is accrued. Talk about how much fire does for paramedic services versus actual. I mean, one question I've asked often, if you have 4 people on a unit and 2 of them are paramedics and 85% of their calls are paramedic calls, then that means 50% of your crew, 85% of the time, is standing around doing paperwork. So why are we not looking at how we can change the way we do our paramedic services to better facilitate more service? But you guys never have those conversations. Matter of fact, you usually just ignore us in the public, rebuke us and laugh at us or mock us or roll your eyes like Ms. Fitzgerald likes to do all the time. We ask legitimate questions that get completely ignored. You guys just changed Title 15 in downtown. I pointed out that our police chiefs for the last 10 years have been rubber stamping live entertainment permits that say conditional use permits will be followed. They never are. I can point an example of example. Our community development director stands up and says, oh, well, it's just really hard to do our jobs, a checklist. I used to run standard operating procedures for a Fortune 500 company in 26 different stores. I went into with a checklist and went, this is what you're supposed to do. And if they didn't do it, we marked it off. But the solution in this city is change the rules, make it easier, and then pretend like we have money to solve things. You're going to hear we had 9 written statements for this thing. 3 of them were from public employee unions. 9 people wrote in about this. 706 people filled out the survey. That's what, 0.065% of the population, of the 18 and over population. It's sort of a laughable idea. So instead of just bowing to what's going to happen and raising taxes, actually look at what we can dig into mathematically.
Thank you.
Good evening, council and staff. My name is Jensen Hallstrom. I would just hope, as we are evaluating, our priorities as a city moving forward, that we would consider what initiatives can become to improve our city's urban forest. In February, Jose Trinidad Castañeda had asked for the creation of an urban forest ad hoc committee. I'm not sure if any consideration you have taken towards such a motion. The only council action that would be required is a motion and a second. So I'm not sure if that's something you're even interested in. Haven't really heard much discussion regarding the subject of urban forest, even though I am trying to definitely urge you to understand that this is a crisis, and if we do not act immediately to at least enforce the current urban forest management plan, and specifically its standards on tree trimming, then we are just passing a great burden on to the future residents of Fullerton that inherit, neighborhoods that will lose shade As I've mentioned before, a certain type of invasive beetle called Polyphagus shothole borer beetle is affecting a lot of our native trees. And over the next 20 years, we could see up to 48% of all native trees in California die off. All of the sycamore trees in Independence Park are actually infected. I'm not sure if anyone is aware of that. They are diseased, likely to fail, uproot, fall, drop branches. What happens when somebody is finally hurt? Who takes responsibility for such a thing? So I would really hope that the creation of an ad hoc committee could bring community engagement and ownership of their neighborhood trees, and hopefully we could work towards solutions. I definitely think, as we also talk about allocating funding to certain departments, I would like to see how we could also save money. The goal for this urban forest management plan is to plant 200 trees per year for the next 30 years, as it was published in 1998. So how much does it cost to pay an employee or contract a tree planting? Could we be saving that money utilizing a volunteer crew like the city of Claremont has? They have started a city green crew under the nonprofit Sustainable Claremont. And from January 2017 to March 2017, they had recruited 46 new volunteers, planted 83 trees and 107 new shrubs. And at that moment, they had 335 unique members to this crew, and they had planted 234 trees and 500 shrubs. So I think that we could utilize volunteers in the city. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Karime. I lived in Fullerton for over 20 years. We have a lot of priorities, and I respect everyone has a different one. But for me, I think public safety and youth comes first. We need more police officers, and we need better options for the firefighters to stay in our city. Because if we have more firefighters, they can promote their youth program, and we have our kids get interested in the program, and we can tackle both problems, public safety and youth. Please consider having better solutions for them so they can stay, and to bring more police officers. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, good evening. My name is Eklet Nunzi. I'm a long-time resident here at the city of Fullerton. The concerns and the vision that we have in our neighborhoods is to improve our quality of life. And that we can achieve it, you see, if we hire more our police. We are deficient in our police department. We are deficient in our fire department. And public safety is a big concern. We have to improve our roads, but if we don't have a safe neighborhood, people is not going to go out. Like we're seeing, we have a lot of neighbors. They are prisoners in their own home because we have a lot of gangs in our neighborhoods. We have a lot of shootings. Maybe you don't hear in different parts of the city, but this is a reality for other parts of our city. And this is what we see every day. Our kids getting engaged in gangs, using drugs, more crime. And this is we see over and over. Our youth is in risk. We need to achieve that. We need to help our police department. We have to engage maybe in a collaboration. We need to hire our police department. We have to pay them more because I don't think that any of us can do the job they do. I don't have the capacity to do the job our fire department, our firefighters do, because it's a hard job. They give their life for us, and I think we have to respect and be loyal for the people that serve us. Our police and our firefighters are our heroes. How is the way that our city of Fullerton is treating our heroes? It's not just about money. It's to give thanks for all they do for us. We are taking classes. We're educating our community for see how hard is the job. Maybe we should have classes for see how hard work our city council. And we can understand the hard job that each of you do for our community. But we have to collaborate. We have to help one to another. Our cost of living is so high. We cannot expect people giving their lives for us. And we cannot, when they are putting their lives in risk, their families in home, because, it's a very hard job. We have to acknowledge that. I have a job that is easy in compare of them, and we have to be respectful. It's not everything in life about money. It's about trust, about helping one another, and that creates respect. And we can live in a short budget, but we cannot live without freedom and safety. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no other public comments, and just a couple of things. And tonight is about maybe educating the audience about how do we decide. I know I can speak for the few of us up here. We would like to see more police officers and retain our firemen. It's a challenge to balance that, and so hopefully tonight you'll see where we're trying to gain our extra police officers and retain our public safety police and fire and keep them, and then balance that with the other needs. So hopefully you will see that tonight and put yourself in our position. What do we do? And again, for myself, I would love to be able to hire, fill those vacancies for fire and police, and I would love to retain all of them. Right now, we're going to see if we can do that. Council, any other? All right, Mr. Domer, we're back.
So at this time, I'd like to bring up Michael O'Kelly, our Admin Services Director.
Thank you, Mayor Silva, members of the council. Mr. Roeder is going to be kind enough to move through the presentation here for me. So I'm pleased to present to you the third quarter financial report for the current fiscal year, which is 18-19. This is the standard quarterly report that you receive. In addition, as we move through, we'll talk about the preliminary general fund fiscal year 19-20 as it's shaping up so far. This is just a reminder, all city funds, just a breakdown. The budget for 18-19 that was adopted was approximately $200 million. That's rounding, but so you can double the percentage and add $1 million to the back of that, and you'll know about how much you spend on any of these specific functions. So, for instance, public safety would be $70 million. All city funds, so the first columns there, we have revenues on the left, expenditures on the right. I always like to remind the council that not all expenditures and revenues are linear. And so there may be expenditures, let's say for a large capital project, where revenues aren't going to be received until the work's performed and a reimbursement is recognized. And so total budget as of now for 18-19 is $226 million. The actual revenues are at about $140 million, which is where we would expect them to be, and we're projecting to spend about $223 million. That's going to be dependent on some of the larger CIP projects being completed or completed enough that we can record revenues for them. On the expenditure side, you see that budgeted is $281 million, actuals are $166 and $235. So the year's progressing as expected, and again with the city, what you see here are some anomalies regarding CIP projects. There's currently at least $75–80 million worth of appropriations for CIPs, so it can skew these numbers. The next one is a pie chart for your general fund, and I think it's obvious up at the top. We always mention public safety is 70% of the general fund. General fund for 18-19 is about $95–96 million. And so we're getting close to $100 million, where you can take those percentages and call them $1 million. We'll probably be there in the next year or two. So when you see 49%, you'll be able to extrapolate $49 million. You could probably call it 48 right now. The next slide, so there are a lot of bars here, and so I'll just say on the left, there's revenues, and on the right, there are expenditures. Those are really the two sides of any budget. That's all your money that comes in, and then that's all the money that comes out. We compare them. We treat them almost as if they're two separate budgets. There's a revenue budget, if you will, and there's an expenditure budget. The revenue budget is really expectations. The expenditure budget's actually authority that the council's given for the city staff to spend money. And so on the left, on the revenue side, I would say that the budget for 18-19 was 95, almost 96 million. And the projected right now is at 61 million, which is at about 63%, which is a little bit higher than where we were last year. But it's where we expect to be. I'll show you a chart in a little bit that goes into more detail there. The projected, though, is an important number. This is with a strong level of confidence where we expect to be at June 30, and that's at 98.6 million. So that's about $2.8 million better than budget. So that's your white revenue column, what we expected, versus blue, what we expect to actually occur. And about $2.4 million of that is related to one-time revenue related to the council-approved sale of underground utility credits about 6 months ago. And so if you strip that amount out, you would be at about $96.4 million. And so you're still up in about a $500,600,000 range. And I'll talk a little bit about revenue going in the future there. We've got some sales tax improvement just because of sales tax increases of about 2%. Plus, there were some anomalies this year as the state changed their receipting system. And so some revenues from a previous year got moved into this year. This is the first chart that shows some preliminary general fund budget numbers. So as we move forward, currently, based on our best revenue estimates, we expect the general fund to be at $97.877 million. You'll notice that's about $2 million higher than the white column, which is budget. That's going to be primarily related to property tax, and a couple other things, and I'll get into that in a further slide here. If you move over to the expenditure side of things, so where are we as far as expenditures go? The budget was $96 million. So as a reminder, you had a balanced budget starting for fiscal year 1920. The actuals are at $68 million, which is at about the 65-66% range. The projection is $93 million. And I'll stop for a minute and just say, so the appropriations on the expenditure side are $96 million. The projections are $93. That's a $3 million positive, if you will. The reason for that is the city has carried a significant vacancy rate in positions. And so if you just do simple math, if our general fund budget for salaries and benefits is $70 million and our vacancy rate has been in the 10 to 13% range, depending on what time of the year, go with 10%, it's been at least that. That would give you at least $7 million worth of savings. But there are certain shifts that are going to be covered with overtime, particularly on the side of for public safety. And so that fills in some of those cost savings. And so you'd expect maybe $7 million fill in overtime for shifts that have to be covered. And what you'll see is we're projecting a net savings of about $3 million. What that means, and I'll talk in the 5-year a little bit forward, is your revenues, exclusive of the one-time money, are going to be about $500,000 better than budget, and your expenditures will be about $3 million less. So the general fund should have, if you give me a little wiggle room on my projections, $3 million higher than what was expected, and I'll show you a chart that solidifies that. Preliminary number is, as a reminder, that where we're at with the budget, we talked about this a couple council meetings back. So we start from zero, and then we right off the bat fill in the buckets for all of the negotiated salaries and benefits increases for the CalPERS required contribution rates. That bucket fills up pretty quick, and what you have left are about 29% of your budget that is not salaries and benefits. And then when you extract out utility payments, lease payments, things that you really can't wriggle out of, we end up, I think maybe there's sometimes some disappointment that we go through all this effort, we zero everything out, and then the number comes in, maybe not surprisingly, unfortunately, however you want to describe it, almost exactly at where we projected fiscal year 1920 would look like 18 months ago when we were building a budget. So nothing really different there. That would be the budgeted expenditures, assuming no change in service levels, no additional new positions, no deletion of positions, no substantial service level changes at all. Just to touch on revenues, I realize there's a lot of numbers as I'm looking here. It's the same bars here. I just talked about the forest. This gets down, maybe not quite to the tree, but into the various stands of trees, if you will. And so what I always like to call as property tax and sales tax, that's about 80% of the general fund budget. So it's about 74 actually, sorry, it's about 70% of your budget, about $64 million. So we watch those very closely. Everything after that becomes some smaller amounts. Other taxes includes transient occupancy taxes. That's about $3.1 million. That's a 10% bed tax that the city of Fullerton has. It's also business registration fees, which are about $1 million. Also real estate transfer tax. It's 55 cents on every $1,000 of property that's transacted within the city. That's about $700,000. The next line's charges for services. That includes your paramedic subscription fees. Big one is ambulance fees. I'll talk about that a little more detail in a minute. I'll move to franchise fees. This is your typical franchise fees for use of the city right-of-way. So this is paid by cable companies, phone company, electric utility, gas company, et cetera. Other revenues is about $7-8 million exclusive of one-time items. Other revenues includes investment income, lease revenues, cell tower rent, and any other miscellaneous item that in and of itself is not large enough to warrant its own area. If I can just touch on charges for services, one of the big items for this fiscal year 18-19 that we currently reside in was the change in the methodology for which we would utilize ambulance services. So the council adopted a program where the city would take on some of the responsibilities of managing the ambulance services as far as the billing side of things go. And so the goal there was to net $1 million of additional revenues. And so what that means is we spend about $2.3 million on paying care ambulance, a fixed amount. It's about $85,000 every 2 weeks. We have a collection agency that also we pay a percentage for the collections, but then the net the city gets to keep, and that was expected to yield $1 million. And we started this first year, the first couple months, as expected, the revenues were trickling in, but it looks like the projection for this year would be the net will be about $900,000, and there doesn't seem to be any reason that number is going to be at least $1 million next year. And there is some upside potential there as well. We haven't seen the leveling off yet. So we're watching every month as we catch up on the collections. The number starts coming up, and I think the last month of February there was about $371,000. And so we're budgeting using that amount going forward, but that number could come in higher. So some other revenues went away. The new revenue of $3.7 million came in, and then you started spending about $2.3 million. So Alan, if you don't mind, on the next slide. This is just to prove out. I won't bore you with revenues. This is important in the first couple quarters. We have revenue projections, and we're highly dependent on the receipt of property taxes, which generally come in November, December, and then in the April, May timeframe as well. And so this just proves out at the beginning of the year, we just take a cash flow analysis and created these blue bars. This was, I think, the first year we did this. And you'll see there's some timing anomaly as revenues are posted, but there's no reason to suspect that our revenue projections are faulty in any way. Okay, so that was revenues. So now we'll talk expenditures. Again, from the forest, way at the top, revenues are expected to come in $3 million less, and so you'll see that's predominantly on the salaries and benefits side. The budget is $68.6 million, and the projected is $65.67, so $3 million. The preliminary for 1920 is $70 million, and so what you want to compare here at this time of the year is budget to budget. What's different in the preliminary budget as compared to last year's budget? We know why the actual is different. There was 10 to 13% vacancy rate. And so the additional $1.8 million is just residual salary increases that are existing in our current MOUs. Retirement costs increase, continue to rise, about 2 to 3% of PERSable salary. So additional increases as we talk regularly. On the maintenance and operations side of it, you'll see about a $1.4 million increase. That relates to our allocations. It's dependent on what we're charging out for liability insurance to build up a reserve in that fund. And capital outlay, generally there's about $100,000 in capital outlay that's budgeted for replacement of certain fire equipment, There's $300 and some thousand this year because the council adopted the purchase of defibrillator equipment that was about $370,000, $350,000, somewhere in there. I think we're getting them a little cheaper than we expected. So expenditures for this fiscal year are coming in as projected, with the exception of vacancies. To me, this is a summary sheet. This is derived from a spreadsheet that has 300 rows and 40 columns out. It looks like a lot of numbers as I look at it. So if I just talk the highlighted numbers, I think is probably the bolded numbers would be the important ones. And so this is where we're projecting. This is a 5-year forecast. Where are we projecting the general fund to start in 1920? That's the top left number. It's $14.1 million. That's about $3 million better than what we were originally expecting when we built our budget last year. Total revenues and transfers in $98 million. Expenditures, again, this is on the preliminary budget, $98.7. So our budget right now is off. If you look at revenues and expenditures, we're still working on the 1920 budget, but you can see it's out by about $800,000. So there's additional work to do at staff level. We're projecting the fund balance at the end of 1920, if that were the budget that the council were to adopt, of $13.5 million. The council has a minimum general fund reserve of 10%, and you'll see that at the bottom of that first column, which that would equate to $9.8 million. But we're expecting that general fund balance to end next fiscal year at 13.5. Recently, the council adopted financial policies. One of the policies was to strive to achieve a 17% reserve requirement. Again, that's just a best practices recommended. That's about 2 months worth of expenditures. So when we roll this out, what I'd just like to say, this is what I generally will call a status quo budget. It's similar to the year before last year, this year. If you look at the top, there's a little summary of, it's basically the preliminary budget. We've added 1% for just unknown additional personnel costs. To leave that number empty seems to distort the expenditure side of things. We have the retirement rates built in. We have, down at the bottom, there's a lot more detail on the key assumptions, but we have 2% inflation for all of the other revenues, operating expenses. We're projecting property tax. It's been increasing by about 6% every year, but that's starting to slow down as the market cools off and interest rates have risen. We're projecting those out at 2% after you get past the next 2 fiscal years. So this is what we would say is, again, a status quo. There's no additional personnel costs other than just a 1%. That would cover if CalPERS costs come in higher than expected. If CalPERS were to change their assumed investment rate from 7 to 6.75, that 1% would be eaten up probably immediately. So this also has no additional street, road, infrastructure spending. So obviously, if you come to these council meetings and you hear that is a priority, this does not include any funding for those purposes. This next one here, it looks almost identical to the last one because it is, except for we've added $6 million starting in fiscal year 2021. So we've got our preliminary budget for next fiscal year, and then we show if the council were to adopt a budget where $6 million of general fund were to go to CIP for streets and road improvements. And so what you see is the ending fund balance, just it's a precipitous drop from 13.5 down to negative 13. And there's no point in looking at your reserve requirements at that point because you're negative. And so, Alan, if you would go to the next slide, this just shows if you extrapolate that out 20 years. I'll start with the slide on the left. What the slide on the left does, there are 2 lines going horizontal. The bright red at the top is a 17% reserve balance. The dotted line is a 10% reserve balance. But if you've got a 1% additional personnel cost plus $6 million that was transferred or used for streets and road projects, you can see at the end of the fiscal years that are shown what the general fund deficit would be. And so you saw the 5-year version where it ended up being about negative 16, 17 million. And these are not cumulative, so you don't add up each of these bars, but at the end of each of those fiscal years, you'd be negative. So you can see, 18 years out, you'd be negative $60 million, which, wouldn't be realistic. I don't think anybody would loan you money to spend for those purposes. And if you look at the right, you see expenditures and revenues, and it's a little garbled there. So what I'd say is look at the lines and the trend there. You're seeing revenue growth and expenditure growth. While they don't look that far apart, $3 million, $6 million, $9 million per year, every year for $20 million will result in that negative $60 million budget. And Alan, could I have you go one slide back, please? I thought just for the sake of discussion, where would you get that $6 million from? And these are purely hypothetical. There's no intention behind them, but just to give you some dollar figure. So if you needed to come up with $6 million, if you were to say you were not going to have a library at all, you just closed it down, there'd maybe get you $3.9 million. And then if you said Parks and Rec has to 100% recover all of the costs for all of their services, that would get you your other $2.5 million. Another example would be police officers. That would be a reduction of about 30 police officers. I think that number would hold true. Or you could say 15 police officers and no library. They're obviously very stark service reduction. And again, I don't mean any intent for any members of the public to speculate that was, other than just pure numbers. So, Alan, if you don't mind moving forward.
I have a question.
Sure, Councilmember.
Actually, two quick questions. One, are there assumptions here for any downturn in the housing market with property taxes going down?
So, Councilmember Zara, the answer to that is no. To the extent that the increases we've seen are not expected, we've budgeted 2% out for property tax increases, which is generally, barring a severe decline in property tax assessments, you're generally going to see that 2% increase. So if you were to throw in, let's say, every sixth year, make it zero, say that the assessor comes in and reassesses, you would be looking at about roughly $1 million per year less in the bucket. So, if you took 5 years out of 20 and said it's going to be at zero, you're looking at somewhere with compounding, somewhere between $5 and $7 million additional shortfall. It also includes that sales tax continues to increase at about 2%. On the other side of it, it does include all of the operating expenses go up 2% as well. And so there's some offsetting there. If the economy declines, you would expect to potentially see some reduction in your operating expenses. And you maybe would have, with an economic decline, maybe have some leverage to renegotiate some things with contractors and that. But the short answer is no, it does not assume any precipitous decline other than just a leveling out with just normal inflationary pressures increasing those revenues.
Right. Do you think that it would be necessary, in your point of view, to have an assumption like that, just so that we can have better predictability?
Sure, I think that's
everybody's talking about a downturn.
Sure, I think that's that's fair, and we have a 20-year forecast that's been built, and so it's pretty easy to just put the assumptions in. I would open it. It just gets a point where we pick a few of these assumptions to use for talking points, but I think that would be fair. Sure.
Yeah, because it gives us at least a little bit so we can stay ahead of the curve. The other question I had is about that 6 million figure. Where is that number? How did you come up with that number? Is that the number of that we have a deficit in our?
It will come up here in a couple of slides, Councilmember.
Thank you.
If you can
Kelly?
go. Yes, Mayor. Sure. There are two of them. So one of them doesn't have $6 million.
Right, this one.
Okay.
So on this one, that we're imbalanced and so forth. Does this take into account any filling of those vacancies that we have?
That's a good question, Mayor. So what it incorporates are 17 vacant positions that we committed in the 18-19 budget to not fund and or delete, and we committed to carrying that out, at least at that time, for a 20-year period. So it would include $1.7 million of savings, which equates to roughly about a 2.5 to 2.8% vacancy rate.
All right, so we're carrying that through these 5 years, that vacancy.
Yeah, so we're not carrying the 10%, though. I think is the other way to look at it.
And I know we're understaffed in public safety. Does this include those spots, those budgeted positions that if we fill, it wouldn't change these numbers, correct?
Yes, Mayor. That this includes no additional positions, but no further reductions in positions other than the 17 that we committed to last year.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question. I'm having a little bit of trouble for the reason that these graphs don't comport with our agenda letter. So when you go through the agenda letter and you mark all your questions and everything, it's difficult to interpose them into your presentation. But one of the things that struck me was on the top of page 4 of the agenda letter says, and here we're talking about the primary physical general fund budget for 1920. And the last sentence in that states that it is also important to note that the expenditure budget assumes a full staffing scenario, not counting for a vacancy factor. So I'm assuming that the reason that the expenditures are less than what they were calculated to be is because you're not paying those salaries. Is that correct?
That's correct, Councilwoman. On the actuals for the fiscal year we're sitting in today, the reason the actual expenditures are lower than budget is because there are vacant positions.
Okay. So I think it would be useful for this council to be briefed on exactly what the vacancy factors are. Now, when you go to your 5-year forecast, how are vacancies treated in the 5-year forecast? Because I'm having difficulty.
Sure.
Are we comparing the same thing or not?
So Councilwoman, they are, from a budget to budget perspective, they're treated the same. From an actual to budget, no. And so what I mean by that is when we created the 18-19 budget, the fiscal year we're in, there was a commitment to delete, not fund 17 positions. That has been carried through, even through today, into the 1920 and beyond budgets.
Okay, I'm having trouble with that statement. There was a commitment to not fund those vacant positions, but this agenda letter states that the expenditure budget assumes a full complement of employees.
It's because technically, that commitment, we actually reduced the FTE. They don't exist anymore. And so I think maybe the way I'm saying it is confusing. We actually deleted 17 FTEs. We didn't specifically identify the exact positions yet. So that probably sounds confusing, but I think to simplify it, it would be we went from 632 FTE to 615. Yeah. And there was only funding for 615 positions, and there remains only funding for 615 positions all the way through the 5-year and the 20-year.
Then
No
it's kind of
additional
a false
vacancies.
savings then. It's not really a savings at all. I mean, savings in my mind means that, you know, you spent $1 for a loaf of bread instead of $1.50. To use something real simple, unlike yourself, Michael.
I apologize for that.
And Mr. Mayor, members of council, on that comment, as you know, we've looked at some of our organizations, including Public Works, Community Development, and are still, because of changing leadership specifically in Public Works, are still implementing some of those position changes. So we have not identified the exact positions. We do know that it was about $1.5 million or so, and Public Works is a little bit difficult because they some of them are fully general fund, some are a portion general fund, some are sanitation funded, some are water funded, and all that stuff. So that's once we implement all the changes, we will know exactly how many positions, because it could be 14 depending on the amount, but it's the amount that we're after, that $1.5 million in savings. So it may be 14 positions, 16 positions, 17 positions. But those positions are not represented in the budget. Going forward for the 5-year forecast, the assumption is, and how we're budgeting, is that we're at 100% of the funded positions. So, theoretically, we are going to be having a vacancy factor. We know
But
that.
there's still a reduction in the number of employees, the FTEs, correct?
Correct.
All right. So, yeah, difficult to compare them. Speaking of sanitation fund, am I correct in assuming that the money in the sanitation fund, which currently the total sanitation fund is projected at the end of the year to be $5.2 million, can those funds be used in the general fund?
Councilwoman, generally the sanitation fund has very specific uses. I can probably have Meg go into more detail, but
what I'm getting at is
Sure.
if there's a savings in the sanitation fund, for example, can those savings flop into the general fund?
The short answer, Councilwoman, would be generally no.
Okay, and the reason I'm asking the question is because in closed session, and I'll keep this very general, the council was considering a proposal to put some positions out to contract. And we were told that there would be approximately $100,000 in savings by doing that in one sector. But if the $100,000 is in the sanitation fund, then how does that help the general fund? How does that $100,000 translate to our being able to bump salaries, for example?
So, Council, just broadly, Councilwoman, I think the approach that management, city staff, and I think the council have taken is, a dollar savings, regardless of general fund or not general fund, is just good government. And so there are times where you may save $200,000, but the general fund savings may only be $60,000. I believe with the specific example that you're talking about, I'm afraid to be quoted on there. I can't recall if the whole $100,000 is general fund savings or not. So I'd have to look to see that. It's savings nonetheless. It's one less dollar a citizen has to pay. Yeah. Well, 100,000 less.
Yeah.
Majority of it is sanitation.
Yeah.
And on just real quick on those when we reduce the 17 positions, when we eliminate them, the 615. So currently we have 615 employees working. Or are those 615, some of them are still vacant that we're looking to fill?
Sure, Councilmember Silva. So you funded 615 positions, and then our vacancy rate has still been at about 10 to 13% of that.
Okay.
So you would see another 60 to 90 positions also being vacant. Besides
Right now they're vacant, so okay. But if we were to hire them, we've already accounted for them. It wouldn't increase our expenditures.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Probably a few slides, Alan. So moving away from the general fund for a minute, explicitly but still implicitly talking about the general fund, capital improvement projects. So in addition to the general fund budget and the budget for all of the special revenue funds and the enterprise funds, there's also a capital improvement project budget. Last year, it was about $26.5 million. This year, it is going through right now at $24 million. None of it is general fund. And so these are for your major capital items. So this is for acquisition improvement of land, street pavement, slurry oversill, traffic signals, signal synchronization, airport improvements, all of the sewer and water improvements that you've been hearing about through the water rate study. All of those items are included in that $24 million. And just as a reminder with the CIP, many of these projects, again, aren't completed in a 12-month period of time. They're significant projects. And so what happens is you adopt these are $24 million of new CIP projects. There are still about $75 million of CIP projects that are in the works from previous years. And those appropriations are carried over as the fiscal year ends. We come back to council. So these are new projects. And Alan, if you could move forward. And so before I talk about how much, this comes back to Councilmember Zara's question earlier. So you probably remember last year, if you were here, there was a roads report, and this described the pavement condition. And these slides are from that report. The slide on the left shows what was projected to be spent in 18-19, and that number was elevated because of the $3 million sale of property. And then it showed the expected ongoing revenues to be around $5 million. The orange line at the top shows your actual index, so you were at 64.7. With those significant expenditures, the expectation is you would rise to 67.7. And then as you spend about $5 million a year, $4 to $5 million, you steadily decline, at least as far out as they project, down to 64.3. So, last year, if you consider you're at 64.7, you'd increase 2%, and then you would about 3%, and then you would steadily decline worse from where you started after spending $25 million. The roads are continuing to deteriorate as you're improving them. Over on the right was a basic chart that showed funding requirements. And so just to maintain your PCI, if you got it up to 67.7, to maintain it there, you would need to spend about $6 million a year. The idea there is 67.7 is arguably not the level to which you want to maintain. I think the Public Works Director, would mention to you that there are certain levels that you want to maintain so you continue to qualify for additional funding, for M2 funding, for example, not to mention just the quality of life for the residents of the city. And so
PCI means pavement condition
index.
Okay.
I know broadly, if you want more detail, I'd probably have to ask Ken or the Public Works Director. But if you look over at the right, so it was if there was an additional approximately $1.5–2 million, you would potentially maintain your 67.7 level of PCI. And I think the discussion at that time was, that maybe wouldn't be sufficient going forward. And if you wanted to turn that around and improve the PCI, the number would be an additional $5 or $6 million. And the $6 million, that's not a hard number. The city obviously has other infrastructure needs, not just street and pavement. There are parks, there are building, there are significant other infrastructure that you see that the city owns.
Mike, sorry, the $6 million then, it's to bring us to a higher level of PCI and then maintain that.
Yes, council member.
Correct.
Yes.
Okay. And what was that number that we would get to?
I'd hesitate to say the exact number, so I'll.
We currently spend about $5 million a year on roads, and that what you see in that first chart is that spending that amount actually will decline our pavement condition index. If we were to just maintain it at a level, we would need to spend a little over $6 million as it is, which requires us to spend at least $1.5 million more per year from the general fund than what we do with our M2 and SB1 taxes to actually increase our overall pavement condition index and to keep our streets above at least I can't even see Megan behind Mike, but a 75. So above a 75% pavement condition index, you would need at least or around $6 million additional general fund a year over and above the $5 million that we put in.
Just for our roads to get a C grade.
Correct.
Close to a C+.
Close.
I
Spoken
have
like a
question.
junior high math teacher.
I have a question as well,
Mr.
Mr.
Whitaker.
Mr. City Manager, this also doesn't include the incidental, although not so incidental, road repairs and improvements that we get through our water department activities and also with new developments.
Last year during the discussion, I think the previous Public Works Director estimated the number potentially could be as high as $1 million if you were able to tailor the work that you're performing. But if you were doing it on a road where there was just happened to be a water break, but there was discussion of potentially another $1 million of water, sewer monies that potentially would help improve that as well.
That results in some road improvements, right?
Yeah, Councilmember, you're right that we try to extend those other resources to get more roads, and also through our planning try to make sure that we're doing a dig once type approach. I do know that we will be working on much like we did last year, a update to some of the charts you see and to where we are in our street conditions, both for educational but also informative to show where we are. are, so that will be forthcoming.
And it wouldn't be unusual to expect that we will have other outside sources adding to our improvements at times, as we did recently with sewer changes with State College and with Raymond, right?
We will always be looking for those additional opportunities to include grant funds, both competitive and then anything else that we can get. So
I'm only bringing it up because they aren't really reflected here, nor could they be with any specificity, but they will likely happen, right?
Well, I have a question, Mr. City Manager. Would you characterize those revenue sources as likely and stable and predictable, or few and far between and hopefully?
Well, they're one time, certainly. They're not predictable, and we do our best, especially in the competitive basis. And then when it comes to, again, property sales, that's contingent on the actual property sales. And so, what we do based through our financial policies is program those for additions, but it would be just that one-time addition to it. So,
let me make a suggestion for street improvements. This would be a small part of it, but there's an example in my neighborhood where a family has been building a ginormous house for the last at least year and a half, close to 2 years. And the damage that has been done to our neighborhood streets by the concrete trucks, the equipment trucks, et cetera, is enormous. And I can't help but think that that expense should be passed on to the developer or the person who is building that home. Secondly, most of the streets in Fullerton have that 4-inch trench that was dug years ago for the cable companies to lay a line. Our streets are really compromised by that trenching because every time it rains, you can see the separation in the trenching between the asphalt that was there originally and the asphalt that they laid over that 4-inch line that goes through all the streets. So when people come, I noticed that recently we had an issue that came up where the company who maybe 6-7 years ago obtained the contract for putting the micro filaments in the streets is only going to do like a 1 or 2 inch trench between the concrete and the asphalt in order to solve that problem. But is there any going back to the cable company that profited from laying all of that cable and saying, look, we got a problem here caused by your trenching?
I'm going to say no to that. That's part of the franchise fees that we would have been paid. And, at the time we should have had better street policies that said, they feather it out or do some other type of patch versus what they had. So,
and as I understand, there's a state law that limits how much we can charge in franchise fees.
Correct. Yes. Yeah. That's so.
But if you're talking about prospective future damage, I think that our community development department ought to look at fees charged to the developer for the effects that they have. Like, for example, there's a big sewer manhole between my house and my neighbor's house, and there's probably a 6-inch patch that goes all the way around that. That is all non-existent. It's a giant pothole now because for some reason this heavy equipment likes to turn around in front of my house, and that's really wrecking hell on the manhole cover. So
yeah, so
I'm sorry, if you can go back, Alan, I never mentioned, just to close the gap on streets and pavement improvements for fiscal year 1920 with new CIP, there's about $6 million, which is higher than what the projections showed. I think those projections were potentially hedging that SB1 was not going to continue moving forward. And so you'll see there's $240,000 happens to be a CDBG grant. But those are your three major sources of street and pavement improvements currently, M2, SB1, and gas tax.
Just real quick, on those gas taxes, that's federal taxes, right, from the sale of a gallon of gasoline? The 905?
Yes. This goes, I think I've heard Ken talk about HUTA a few times and FUTA, but I think the short answer to that, Mayor, is yes.
And so I'm just curious, are we starting to, get funding for all these electric cars. I mean, this is how we were getting funding for our roads through the gas tax. Now with the increase in electric cars, is there any money coming forward?
That has not started to be assessed yet. I believe that's actually in January 2020, and then that would be added through the SB1 allocation that is projected through the Department of Finance for us. So,
okay. All right.
I'm sorry, Alan, if you can go back one more time. I'll just touch on additional funding. This is a discussion item that continues to come before you, and it's the similar bullet points here. Continuously looking for grant funding, additional revenues, consistently advocating for more equitable funding allocation methodologies, use of future one-time revenues and or cost savings, which has been done over the last 18 months. And then the bottom line number there, with that $6 million, as I described, if there was a reprioritization or a reduction of other general fund services. So thanks, Alan. The next step in the process. So I'm about to wrap this up here. We're going to go back to the table again with the departments, continue doing our review, analysis, our reconciliations, preparing a budget document, and then we'll be coming to the council for a budget workshop on May 14th. And we hope for budget adoption on June 4th, and I suppose the backup would be June 18th council meeting as well. And I think, Alan, I believe that's my last slide.
Yes. So now we will turn it over to Alan Roeder.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, members of the council, it is a privilege to be back before you this evening. One of the things that I have learned from my prior experiences serving on an interim basis is that you never want to walk away feeling as though you haven't finished the job. And the opportunity to come back and assist you in walking through the strategic planning process and focus on those matters that are most important to you and most important to the community, it's a good opportunity to help further that initial contribution. What we have for you this evening are a couple of different items that are really about your engagement and hearing from you. So I was mentioning to one of the staff earlier, so oftentimes your agendas are populated with decision items that must be addressed within a specified period of time. We oftentimes do not have the opportunity to step back and simply listen to you as council members, listen to your vision, listen to your expectations on the broader scope. As opposed to dealing with individual action items. And that's really what we hope to accomplish this evening. I do want to be respectful of your time and keep my comments to a minimum and focus the attention on comments and input from you as council members. And we will be starting off, just as a brief refresher, with the initial set of priority policy statements that were developed and subsequently approved by the City Council last year to provide guidance to management and staff in development of the 2018-19 operating budget. As you'll recall, those policy statements were developed with input from you as council members and from the public and focused on three primary areas: fiscal and organizational stability, public safety, and infrastructure and city assets. Within each priority policy statement are a series of specific actions identified to direct implementation to the adopted policy statement. Later this evening, we will be asking you to revisit these priority policy statements and the supporting action items, and for you to voice your thoughts as to whether there are any suggested additions, deletions, or modifications that you feel are appropriate. I would also, when we review those priority policy statements, encourage you to keep in mind these as we review the results of the stakeholder engagement effort, as well as the development of mission and vision statements in direction for the upcoming budget. Speaking of the stakeholder engagement, I want to compliment the city for its outreach effort this year in connection with the strategic planning. I hope this is a tool that you will make greater use of. But to provide an additional element of public input into the priority policy statements and supporting action items, staff utilized the engagement tool as provided through OpenGov. I think what's important for both members of the council and members of the public, and certainly members of the staff, to keep in mind is that the engagement tool is not the same as a survey. It is simply one more means of attaining public input. The results cannot be validated as representing a percentage of overall opinions from various constituencies. So it does differ from a survey that is conducted in strict accordance with methodology. That does not make it any less important as a tool of input to you as council members as decision makers. The engagement tool was available from April 3rd through April 17th of this year with a total of 706 responses. Copies of the engagement tool, questions that were posed, and all responses are available to members of the public. Additionally, participants were invited to provide written responses on development of both the mission and vision statements. And let me say that is no small request of members of the public, as you as council members will soon find, to develop a mission and vision statement. It's much easier to say than it is to do. Despite that, we had respondents offering 245 mission statement responses and 229 vision statement responses. I think it's important at this point to express appreciation to the members of the public, members of your own staff, members of the business community, and all other parties that took the time and effort to respond. This is something that I think is a good step, and we should express appreciation to members of the public that took the time to share their opinions with you. Excuse me, let me back up. We were able to draw some conclusions, fairly clear conclusions from the engagement tool. Principally, that most respondents agree that the current priority policy statements reflect the most important policies. What's important to those who took the time to provide you with their thoughts and interests. However, those same respondents rate the city as somewhat or not effective when it comes to implementing the priority policy statements. So we have a clear, I think, read from those members of the community that took the time to share with you their opinions. As part of the effort, we also asked the respondents to identify their top 10 priorities. Those are reflected on the screen before you. Should add that there are no qualifications to the top 10 priorities in terms of expectations. And let me use as an example, we did not ask what respondents would deem a satisfactory level of response times. They simply identified that police response times is a priority. They were not defining that for you in terms of what would be, in their opinion, a desirable response time. And I think that holds true for all 10 of the items that are on that list. So the engagement tool, I think, has accomplished what we had hoped it to do, and that is solicit quality input from members of the community. Before moving forward, I would like to ask of the council whether you have any questions regarding either the engagement tool itself or the responses that have been submitted for your consideration this evening, just as a general point of query. Is that all pretty understandable, straightforward? Are there any particular issues, disagreements? We don't have to all agree, but hopefully we all understand the information that came out of this exercise.
Yeah, I think it's more than apparent that the public in general agrees with the priority policy statements, that they strongly agree or agree. In the case of physical and organizational stability, 86% strongly agree or agree. The next category, public safety, is even higher. And for infrastructure, the priorities, the public again strongly agreed or agreed with the objectives. So it looks like we're on the right track as far as the policy statements go. I did have a question, though, having to do with the infrastructure and city assets objectives. Second to the last one. One of the objectives is to establish and maintain a master plan, parentheses, inventory assessment and long-term strategy for maintenance and enhancement, as well as options for maximizing the value and potential monetization of each asset for all of the city assets, including city-owned properties and other facilities. I understand the part about maintaining an inventory, but what does it mean about options for maximizing the value and potential monetization of each asset?
Councilmember Flory, I did not want to interrupt you on that. We will be getting to that later in this discussion, but please hold that thought, and we will get to that when we have discussion of the policy priorities and have that addressed.
And I would say, Mr. Roeder, from what you told us, they strongly agree with the policy statements, but your other statement was they don't think we're very good at actually doing it. I mean, to me, that just tells me that they agree with what we're saying, but they're ready for us to do something about it.
Right. I think it comes down to a matter of execution.
Right.
And are we executing or meeting those policy priorities in a fashion that the public finds acceptable and supportable?
Yeah.
Any other questions? If not, we will move on to some discussion and solicit council input on the mission statement and vision statement. And there are some, and I think it's reasonable that there's some go, well, what does a mission statement and vision statement have to do with the budget? Why is that important? Is this just an exercise that organizations go through and publish it and put it on the wall and then go about their business? Why it is important to the budget is if there's not concurrence among you as elected officials as to your vision, where we are attempting to get to, and the manner in which we are to get to that end point, it makes it very easy for everybody to just go do their own thing. And I think that's why having consensus, vision, and a mission statement in terms of what we are willing to do and how we are willing to get to that endpoint are important from a budget standpoint. So we will be asking you this evening just for your comments and input for both the vision statement as well as a mission statement. We'll take that input and then come back next month with a draft of each for your consideration and adoption.
Why do we need a mission statement when we already have our priority policy statement? Because at the beginning of every agenda item, and I saw this was a new thing when I came back on the council, the agenda item, there's always a statement that says this item matches the following priority policy statements. So why do we need a mission statement in addition to that?
I will, if I can get Mr. City Manager's attention here. We felt this was important in terms of why you need a mission statement as well as a vision statement. Really is the overarching focus of the council above what you have adopted in terms of priority policy statements. From a practical standpoint, you would already have these adopted and in place prior to your consideration and adoption of priority policy statements. These would already be in place. The reality is that mission statements and vision statements change over time. The vision that elected officials in Fullerton had 20 years ago are arguably different than what you have today. And that's why those do change over time. But let me stop a second and ask Mr. Domer if you would like to elaborate on both the mission and vision statement.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. And are they absolutely necessary to have? No, we've been operating without them. They're guiding principles, and they do help guide the organization as an organization as we go forward. It actually came up in a couple of our grant applications that there was a requirement to have a mission and vision. So we actually had to go back to the Fullerton plan to pull what was in there, which is just for what is our general plan document, and utilize that. So are they absolutely necessary? No. Are they good for helping guide the organization and communicating what we believe and why we are here as a city to serve our residents? It is a good practice.
I, for one, like the sample mission and vision that you have written here.
Mayor Pro Tem, I was going to offer, in light of the time and the importance in getting into more detailed discussion on the priority policy statements, to pose to all of you, rather than asking for your individual input on both the vision as well as the mission, is to ask all of you, because you do have sample mission statements and sample vision statements, if you would like to simply individually just comment on what you would like to see added or deleted from those, rather than to try to go through this individually and recreate these. I think that would be easier and still reflective of the council's posture, and it will be back before you to take action on anyway.
I have no additions.
Does that sound reasonable?
Yeah.
Mr. Mayor, I'll defer to you to check with your peers.
Mr. Whitaker?
Yeah, in reviewing some of the sample statements from other cities, which are included in our packet, I was most taken by the city of Orange, because to me a mission statement should be simple, as something that could be easily memorized. It helps provide focus, reduces fuzziness. And what Orange says is the city of Orange is committed to excellent service for our residents, businesses, and visitors. And what that does, it focuses on what the core purpose of city government is, which is to deliver municipal services. And it's aiming at the customers in this case. And I just find that to be a particularly simple statement that embraces quite a bit in terms of delivering the necessary quality and maintaining the mission.
Thank you.
Glendale had a similar one, but Orange I thought was the best.
Other members of the council?
Yes, I also agree with both Councilmember Whitaker and Fitzgerald. I think the samples agreements are great. I like what Orange has done. as well. I do have just a couple additions on the sample mission statements. We are the education community, and we do have plenty to work with as far as educational institutions. So I'd like to incorporate that in our mission statement. I know we say to work in partnership with our residents, businesses. I'd like to insert here educational institutions as well, just so that we remind ourselves that we do have these institutions within our city, and that we should continue working with them. Also, I'd like to add when we're looking at the features that make Fullerton a desirable place, I'd like to insert here an environmentally friendly and safe place to live, work, and play. That way we incorporate both the environment and public safety in that. As far as the sample vision statement, I would like to see us incorporate a diverse city which constantly seeks to enhance the quality of life and provide opportunity for all its residents, of all ages. So again, we have young, we have seniors, and it'd be nice to see that we take into consideration all ages and opportunities for everyone. So that is my my comment on that.
Great, thank you very much.
Any Ms. Flory, or you would?
Well, just reacting to Councilmember Zara's statements, I think that a desirable place to live means environmentally cognizant and safe. So in a mission statement, I don't think we need to break it up into so much. I don't even know that I'd say to work in partnership with our residents, but to work with our residents and businesses and eliminate the partnership thing to tighten it up a little bit. And all of its citizens does include all age groups. So I think it kind of goes without saying.
And on my part, having been part of this, something like this with our school district, what Mr. Whitaker mentioned, concise and to the point, something that you can roll off your tongue. I like both of what we have here. I would like to see, and I don't have suggestions right now, how to shorten them so that they can become concise to the point and we can say them, within 10 seconds, within 5 seconds. I think the shorter the better, but so we'll, I guess provide more feedback as we go. But I would like to see them so that a bit shorter.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, council members. I think for staff, this is exactly what we were hoping for. Even sometimes when it says, don't do this, let's go this direction. So that was very helpful.
Yeah, and then just one thing, and keep in mind that we're trying to point out what the city can deliver.
Correct.
Correct. Right. Okay.
Okay. Next, and I think a key part of tonight's discussion focuses on the priority policy statements that will frame the priorities and what will help the city manager and the management team and staff bring forward to you in the 1920 budget. What we have provided for you and members of the public and that we have on the screen is one of 3 policy statements with each of the identified action items or directions under those policy statements. We have brought these back to you this evening so that you can raise questions, so that you can recommend additions or deletions, modifications. These were adopted by the City Council previously, but as I've said, time and circumstances and conditions change over time. So it's important that we bring this back to you so that you can review these. Let us know if they should remain as stated. let us know if they required some further explanation, and modify these so that the staff and management have a sense of the council's direction for the upcoming budget. So let me start, and I think, Mr. Mayor, with your consent, that we will simply take council input on each of these categories separately.
Okay.
So we will start off with the fiscal and organizational stability. So if I may ask members of the council to engage and share with us their thoughts on this policy statement, and equally as important, the steps identified under it in terms of any changes or direction or modification or additions you would like to see to this.
Just on what the residents had indicated, that they agree with the policies, but they don't necessarily see us. I would like to see, maybe this could apply to all three, but in this case, something that allows us to communicate or show the residents that we are executing, implementing these, and I don't know what that looks like, but I know that down second from the third bullet down, or from the bottom up, develop multi-year matrices to evaluate standards of services and efficiency of organizations. That I think we might be able to modify or adjust to allow us to create those matrices and communicate them with our residents. But I'll stop there and.
So not simply developing a measuring tool, but making sure we do something with the results of that measuring tool relative to informing the public. If they've gone through these, looked and said, we like those priority policy statements, how do we get back in touch with them to let them know, here's what our progress is?
And I think also it'll keep us informed. Are we meeting these policies? Are we addressing them?
Okay.
Mr. Whitaker?
Yeah, I think you're referring to a yardstick to something that we can look at over time and measure progress and put it out clearly. That's what the public is. First of all, we need to develop tools that are very clear and understandable to us, but also to the public as well.
Yes. And that's whether the results are positive or not, but simply a standardized reporting mechanism. Any other members of the council?
Yeah.
I just wanted to add before I pass it on to Councilmember Flory, I was pretty impressed really with the policy statements generally that we have here. Certain of them lead to various interpretations, I think. It's absolutely a goal to increase the general fund reserve balance, to reduce OPEB and PERS liabilities. But those could work in both directions in terms of modifying and changing and providing expense cuts, as well as revenue enhancements. So I do think that generally, as I went through it, I wound up writing good on here because I think the bones of what we had in these priority policy statements are pretty good.
I also was impressed with the policy statements. I'd put the one that's listed last up at the top. Ensure the city provide positive, solution-oriented customer service, because that's what we're in business for. And then number 2 for me would be to increase organizational efficiency and cooperation to better serve the community. I don't think you need to put internally and externally, because that means everything that the city does. So just eliminate internally and externally, make that number 2. If you're going to talk about increasing the general fund reserve balance, I think there ought to be a percentage there to no less than 15% or no less than 10%. But if we're holding a reserve currently of 20%, for example, then that would not be one of our objectives. So I think there should be an interest, and I think 15% is probably what we ought to be shooting for. Implement technologies. Then you put such, not you, but such as open source data and procedures. You know, I'm kind of a computer geek, but I don't know what an open source data is. So I think to implement technologies and procedures to increase transparency and accountability, I think that's sufficient. You don't need to put some phrase that most people probably won't understand. And those are my comments.
Great, thank you. And I think, as we talked before, the clearer and simpler the statement,
yes,
the better it is both for you as members of the council, but equally so for the public. And also when you then create that measuring stick, it's much easier to evaluate your success or lack thereof when you have it.
For example, open source data will probably be called something else next year.
Oh, undoubtedly.
It'll just be called data, maybe.
I'm being facetious, but...
Yeah, probably not.
Yeah.
Mr. Roeder, I would also add on here, I agree with the things that Councilwoman Flory said, but I would add another statement that says that we will explore additional revenue sources for long-term financial stability and in order to improve our level of service.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And I would certainly support that.
Yep.
Excellent.
Mr. Roeder,
right.
So I think I agree with most of my colleagues here, and specifically I agree with Mayor Pro Tem on the revenue. I think the main objective, I mean, if in order for us to actually reach any of our objectives, we need to increase our revenue. That is where I see us being a little deficient. In this particular fiscal and organizational stability category, we look at a strong economic development team as part of what we are trying to achieve. But I have not seen that happen since 2017. So what I would like to see is that we focus on economic development, we simplify these objectives, and then focus really on the economic development side of things, because ultimately we do need to generate revenue, and I think we need to start looking at all options. But without a economic team, we won't be able to really have that ability to expand on that. Looking at all revenue options should be something that we consider. We need to also look at marketing our city a little bit better, and rebranding it and creating it as with a vision of being a destination city. That is something I think that other cities have successfully done. For example, Orange, when you go to the Orange Circle, you know exactly what you're getting. And I think we have not been able to capitalize on the fact that we're close to Disney, we're close to Knott's Berry Farm, we're surrounded by all these tourists, but we fail to attract them to our city. And so I think we need to start looking at ourselves in a little different way and looking at marketing and rebranding. We also have a variety of services that we internally within our city don't advertise as much. For example, the ambulance, the paramedic subscription program. I think that we can work on marketing that to increase the subscription, which I think will enhance quite a bit in our public safety department. And I do agree with the mayor and council member Whitaker on creating benchmarks for us and also for our growth. I think we need to start looking at our sales tax. From the discussion we talked about, what our revenue sources are, and we kind of lump in sales tax with property tax as if it's just one source. But I think I'd like us to start considering sales tax as a separate entity and start looking at ways of how to improve that over time, and creating also benchmarks of growth for our city so that we are hitting these goals over time. And if we falter, we know how to go back and start adjusting to that. So that is what I'd like to see is for this particular category. Thank you.
We have any other comments? before we move to the next category. Let me suggest something to you, and I'll certainly spend time with the city manager discussing how this might be done. I think it would be a benefit to you and members of the public that when we come back with these policy statements, if we identify for each of the steps, what have we accomplished for a given reporting period, whether it's on a quarterly basis, annual basis. It's one thing, for example, to talk about reducing OPEB and PERS liabilities. Let's talk about what steps have we taken. It may be a very good thing to accomplish, but let's come back and talk about what have we accomplished in a given period of time to do that.
Sounds great.
So,
yeah, and Mr. Mayor, members of council, one of the good things about getting a strategic planning process and setting priorities from the city council is then, those become part of my goal setting, which then becomes part of my expectations and goal setting for department heads, which then becomes their goal setting for their managers and supervisors and down from there. So it's a good thing to go forward. One of the things we have not done here in the city of Fullerton is an accomplishment at the end of the year. So, what have we achieved? What are those metrics that we've, accomplished during the past year, be it the fiscal year or the calendar year? So those are all things that we can look at.
Next, we will move on to the category of public safety. We have quite a number of very specific items within this priority policy statement identified. Many of those are matters that have been brought to your attention. I'm sure you as a council have discussed. Are there additional additional items or changes to what you have here, or potentially reductions or removal of items listed under public safety?
Yeah, I would have one to add, that we add recruit and retain quality employees. And under the second bullet from the bottom currently, it says ensure departments have the technology, equipment, training, and resources conducive to providing public safety. I don't think that's a strong enough statement. I think we need to say to providing the highest quality public safety. Something of that sort.
Very good.
Yeah, I'd like to concur. I think we need to add in this recruitment and retention. I think this is one of our biggest challenges, and I think it needs to be a strong objective that we have to tackle this issue. But I do also want to make sure that we don't forget our other employees. I know that our retention and attrition is not exclusive to public safety, and there is. So I think we also need to make sure that that's a broad policy that we have, is looking at our employees. Because if we are to provide good service, we need to also, as an employer, take care of our employees so that it reflects well in the community.
So perhaps a mention of it as well in the fiscal and organizational stability.
Yeah, that would be a great thing to do. Yes, thank you.
And let me share with both of you that is an industry-wide concern. I know it's particularly critical here in Fullerton, but it is a broader industry-wide problem as well. And there are a lot of other factors. It's not simply monetary, but that's obviously an element that needs to be addressed. Other members of the council?
Well, on my part, I like what we have, and I do like what Mayor Pro Tem added. And again, just the way to measure these again, to how are we doing. Like we said, reduce 9/11 response times. And come back next time and have we done that? Just a way to measure and report out.
Okay. Any additional comments?
What's missing is it was clear in most of the statements that were provided through the survey that there's not really a strong enough perception of safety in this city. And so something in here needs to address that somehow to increase the public's sense of safety, that this is a safe environment.
Very good. Thank you. Any further comments on the public safety category? If not, we will move on to the third priority statement on infrastructure and city assets. I also want to note on both this statement as well as the other two, they are not mutually exclusive of one another. There are steps in each that have a much broader application. In this case, we're talking about infrastructure and last on public safety, but those policies and directives really are broader than that by category. So we will bear that in mind as we move forward. Infrastructure and city assets, obviously focusing on a key item of your discussion tonight, and regularly as it pertains to street maintenance and infrastructure maintenance. We have 3 identified targets in this category. Do we have additional items that you would like to list? And we will get a clarification, Councilmember Flory, on the item that you raised earlier.
I have a suggestion for simplifying the objective. Number 1, for example, and it also pertains to number 2. Instead of having such a long parenthetical element in there, put establish and maintain a master plan for all of the city's infrastructure, equipment, and technology systems. The master plan shall include inventory, long-term strategy for maintenance and enhancement. So make it a 2-sentence statement, because otherwise it's incomprehensible unless you break it down. And the same goes for the second one.
Excellent. Thank you.
And then I would also suggest adding to the third one that it read, identify grants and other funding opportunities to accelerate the city's pavement management program in order to achieve a pavement condition index of 80% in 10 years.
Very good.
And I don't think we need to...
Very clear.
Yeah, we don't need to talk about just identifying grants for the city's pavement management program, because there are a number of grants out there for other infrastructure projects. So I think our objective should include identifying grants for other infrastructure.
Sure. It's not exclusive. Pavement repair is a priority, but certainly not to the exclusion of other opportunities.
So an additional point perhaps on grants for all infrastructure projects.
Pavement management program as well as other infrastructure projects, period. And then maybe add the 80% in 10 years as a second sentence.
Okay.
However we want to word it, I just want to be very clear. At least that's my priority.
Mm-hmm.
We're running the risk here of crossing over from policy statements to goals, right?
That's...
So these need to, I think, still be broad and more general as much as possible. We may share some of the goals in mind here, but I'm not sure this is the right place for them.
But we also want to have enough details so that they're measurable.
Yeah. In my mind, objectives are goals. So.
Okay. Additional comments?
Yes, I think I agree with identifying grants. I think that should be probably our number one up there, so that we can always stay focused on the fact that we need revenue. And so I would place that up at the top, and there are a lot of opportunities out there. Our city, the southern part of our city, is considered a disadvantaged community by all standards, and there are opportunities there that we have. I'm not sure if we have fully tapped into as far as additional funding sources. So I do agree with Councilmember Flory on adding all options, not just for pavement management program, but for other. I know there are some in the water district and SAWPA. There's plenty of grants there for water related matters and projects. Also, we need to keep in mind the opportunity zones. We do have, the southern part of the city. Most of it is an opportunity zone. I'd like us to explore those options. And I know that this may not necessarily go into the statement, but just to sort of reiterate some of the important things so we don't miss out on any potential grant funding. Again, I mean, if it were up to me, I would say the statements would be make more money, fix roads, make it, public safety and employees.
Yeah. Well, and it goes much further than simply identifying grant opportunities, but what kind of batting average you establish in obtaining those grant funds. And oftentimes that means that cities got to be willing to step up and make some investment itself to be successful in the grant market, because there are a few parties that are simply going to walk up to you and say, we'll fund 100% of what you want. That doesn't happen very often anymore. So it's all about balancing those out, but identifying it's one thing, being successful is a whole different matter, and that goes to this issue of measuring success. It's not how many grants you identify; it's how many you are successful in that competition.
And on that note, I mean, does the city have a? Well, I know we do. I guess a full grant writing team that we can rely on. I know we've used our internally our departments, and is it Blake and Associates?
We use a combination, mostly Blaze and Associates, and we do have a grant activity team, or it's GAR report. So key folks from each department get together on a monthly basis to go over with either Blaze and Associates or anything that we've been forwarded from Townsend or anybody else to look at those and how it affects and how we can apply, so in the deadlines and everything. So, but as far as dedicated grant writers, no, we do not have anybody on staff. We do use the consultants for that.
Okay, and then just on this item still, excuse me, I know the public came back and said that the roads, was it the roads, the number one priority?
Roads and potholes.
Potholes. So I was trying to figure out a way to include something in this area to engage the public in identifying resources or, identifying resources to improve our infrastructure. Because that does seem to be it is the highest priority that everyone, I've been on council for 2.5 years, and that's the constant item that comes up wherever I go, fix our roads. So I'd like to see something to the extent and engage our public in identifying resources, if that's possible here, to secure our above average PCI scores, if we don't want to get too specific and make it tie us in.
In other words, is to find a way to engage members of the community to identify ways to help the city get caught up to where you want to be.
And I know that we're planning a study session on infrastructure that's coming up. So that'll be one way that we can tap the audience and say, what do you all have? But so, maybe we can work on that and see if we can get something in there.
Okay, very good. Any additional comments, thoughts? Okay.
I guess I wanted an explanation about the infrastructure.
That's correct. Thank you for correcting me. Mr. City Manager, would you like that would you like to answer that, or would you like to have Public Works seek to address that?
Can you repeat the question real quick?
Well, I suggested that we break that into two sentences. Establish and maintain a master plan for all of the city's asset, including city-owned properties and other facilities. Well, for all of the city's assets, wouldn't those be city-owned properties?
Absolutely. Again, we can when we bring this back for a final review and actually an action, we can work on that to understand. Separating it into two different sentences, but also including it so it's one concept. Because an asset is our facilities.
Okay. So establish and maintain a master plan for all of the city's assets. Period. Said master plan shall include inventory, assessment, and long-term strategy for maintenance and enhancement. And then the part, as well as options for maximizing the value and potential monetization. Like, what would maximizing the value be? And what does potential monetization of each asset mean? Wouldn't it be simpler to say potential sale of each asset? Isn't that what monetization is?
Correct. Yeah, in a less technical term, absolutely. So what we'll do is when we bring those back, we will kind of clarify and make sure that they're clearly understood and convey what the council is discussing tonight.
Say what we mean what we say. So that's we will bring that back to you in that fashion.
All right.
Any additional thoughts or comments on actually any of the priority policies?
I have a question on the one of the slides in the graph put the first 10 priorities out. Correct?
Yes.
And so we have a page in our agenda material, page 6, that has 50 priorities that were listed in the educational tool for obtaining public input. And yet, just tonight, we've had people talk about city tree maintenance and citywide landscaping, recruitment and retention of employees, including public safety. We know that library services is a big part of this community, and this council will be presented with a report on the Hunt Branch Library here within the next few weeks. Councilmember Zara has often commented about the lack of code enforcement, so that's a concern of his. So when we put those 10 top priorities on a slide, I hope we're not doing that to the exclusion of all these other priorities that are important.
No, council member, we are not. We were simply emphasizing the top 10 in terms of the respondents' identification. That is in no way, shape, or form intended to be dismissive of all of the other items on the list that were identified. We recognize that the demands and interests are and always will exceed your financial ability. That doesn't make them any less important. We simply made somewhat of an arbitrary decision to identify those that were noted in the top 10.
And just to reiterate that we can't do all of it. Ellen talks about the constrainment of the financial resources and all that stuff, and so there is an aspect of prioritization. And so that is part of this process, and part of the budget process coming up is that strategic prioritization of what we can do with our resources.
That's why also you will find yourselves at times focusing on issues that may not be in the top 10, but are under consideration because of the funding source. Mm-hmm. Doesn't mean it's not important. It doesn't fall in the top 10, but it may have a unique funding source. I'll use as an example various elements of the airport operation, where the funding source is separate and distinct from these. So,
I think I agree with you, and thank you, Councilmember Flory, for mentioning one of my concerns about South Fullerton and in general in a lot of places where we do have a lack of code enforcement. But I think it does stem, like you said, from a lack of revenue and enough funding. So I think if we tackle funding and make that a strong priority and start generating revenue enough that we could actually bring in more employees that could serve as code enforcement officers that could tackle some of these issues that we couldn't because of a lack of employment.
Okay, good. Thank you. With that, we have addressed each of the priority policy statements and the sub-action items under each. I want to thank all of you as council members for focusing on these and providing your staff and members of the public with your comments. This is a non-traditional format to do that, but I think it's helpful, and particularly the visibility for members of the public to be able to hear your comments directly relative to the issues that'll be coming, that have been before you for some time, will continue to be, and how you map out a strategy to address those. Extremely important. I would defer then to the mayor for any additional comments that you may have and the balance of the agenda. Again, for myself, thank you for allowing me in your house to help with this effort. It's appreciated by myself. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, at this point, I think we'll open it up to public comments, and then we can bring it back. We need to. So, any members of the public wishing to come up, please do so.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Chris Garter. Thank you for tonight's program. I think it was very helpful. I know the city's getting this underway. I would suggest that going forward, we make this an annual process where you set some of the initial priorities during the budget process. You come back with this kind of a program in the December or January timeframe so that it can inform the budget process before here we are toward the end of that. So that's what's done at the county and a lot of other agencies. I think that would be helpful. I would say that direction is key. You provided direction regarding a lot of these priorities here tonight, and going forward, emphasizing that it can't be emphasized enough that staff needs to see where you want them to go and where you think you can make progress. A lot of times we've seen in recent years that the city will have kind of a stop and start system where we look at an issue and then kind of get stuck and we back away from it. A few years later, we go to the issue, we get stuck, and then nothing happens. And I hope that you can identify issues where you know that things need to happen, and you think you can get there within the scope of the Brown Act, of course. I will say that I hope that we're at an inflection point in this city. I hope that things are looking up from here. We've had, I think, an interesting, good first 4 months with this new council, and I hope that going forward we can build momentum and build off the city's strengths, which are many. We focus on the weaknesses, I think, more than the strengths to our detriment, and I hope that on all these issues that were mentioned, finance, infrastructure, public safety, that we can both look at the bad and the good. To that point, I would say on infrastructure and roads in particular, it was kind of murky based on Mr. O'Kelly's presentation, but he was basically saying that we know there's a level of vacancy every year, and we only budget for a part of it. So he expects $3 million a year of underrun relative to what he presented. Now, part of that is good to keep because this is a medium-sized budget, so you want to have room. But it would be smart to have some sort of a policy on unexpended general fund revenues at the end of each year, whether you want to set some aside for reserves or all of it to roads or some mix in between, so that there's a constant sense that as money is saved, money is earned for another program in the city. I would also say you should look at the EIFD proposal that Placentia is working on right now in terms of infrastructure and economic development. They're doing something really, really neat. And I would say, with metrics, consider expanding your scope of what you do with your quarterly budget reports, and or with that annual report in January of this type of a program, to have an annual follow-up and then quarterly reports on the metrics. Thank you.
Thank you.
Not that it matters, but I have a few notes. Zara, Councilman, very good question on economic downturn. It's a solid hope for the best, expect the worst question. It's something that seriously needs to be thought about regularly at this council. Councilman Flory, savings is buying a loaf of bread for $1 instead of $1.50. Absolutely. Right now, we call it a savings if we go without bread, and a 64% CPI is certainly going without some bread. Staff, Mike, sorry, I suck at your last name. Regarding savings in the sanitation versus general funds, it's saving nonetheless. It's one less dollar the citizen has to pay. Yes, this is what we should be approaching with every financial issue. Councilwoman Flory again. So why do we need a mission statement? Exactly. Thank you for asking that question. What happens if council votes contrary to the mission and vision statements? Nothing. Nothing at all. This is the 1990s exercise in futility to pretty up grant applications to pretend we're accomplishing something. The only guiding principles the city needs are accountability and transparency by way of doing what you say regarding delivering services and being open about how it is done, all of which is seriously lacking in Fullerton. We talk of mission statements and vision statements all we like, but we should probably look to Mike Tyson, who said everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. That punch in the mouth in California typically comes by way of pensions, which this council wants to exacerbate via bootlicking and promises to expend more in that budget-crushing area. Let's look at CalPERS from 18 March of this year. According to CalPERS Chief Investment Officer Ben Meng, as of end of February, CalPERS return rate of the present fiscal year was just 1.62%, Meng told the board Monday. Based on historical probabilities, the fund's chance of meeting the 7% rate by the end of the fiscal year, June 30, is less than 30%. That's going to be a hard punch in the mouth when it comes. If things take a turn for the worse, we're hosed, and until you put all options, including contracting out services, up to and including public safety on the table, you aren't doing your due diligence or being honest in your deliberations. If you're afraid to look into things and accept bids on contentious issues, you're abdicating your public duties, which I realize means nothing to at least a few of you. And I thought this was going to be fairly pointless, but it went ridiculous. 80% road CPI in 10 years? You haven't done that ever on this council. And many of you have been here for several years or more than once. If we're going to be unrealistic, can we add finding gold at the end of rainbows and harnessing unicorn power to this? I mean, we just heard that we need an extra $1 million in money we don't have just to keep our current around 65% CPI, and an additional $5 million a year we don't have to raise it to 75, to get it to 80. How many more million is that we don't have? These are city mission and vision statements. People are city mission and vision statements. People are supposed to agree upon, and they're not just supposed to be ridiculous campaign statements. One final point of fact, because it gets brought up all the time in these meetings: cities don't generate revenue. You tax people, and you take money from those who do generate revenue. So remember that when you talk about increasing revenue. You're not increasing revenue. You're taking more from people.
Mr. Ferguson, are you suggesting a tax?
No, I'm not. I like cuts, not taxing more people.
Thank you.
Oh, there are some things left up here. Hi, my name is Jane Reifer. Pardon me, I'm just distracted by these things here. Good evening. I have a 3-point comment for items I didn't quite see on the survey options. 2 of which I know are of huge concern to a lot of residents. One I don't think is quite on the radar, but I want to mention it anyway. So the first is I didn't quite see the issue of West Coyote Hills listed amongst these options, although if it's considered as part of number 8, park and trail maintenance, that's great. I know there are still some opportunities the city can take to make it a 100% nature park. And also with dollars that are external to the city's funds. Secondly, I would like to see added to the priority statement number 3, a preservation of what is unique and irreplaceable in our city, what differentiates us in a positive way from other cities, such as our special buildings, our special neighborhoods, and our special and irreplaceable open space. I think that if we don't do some of these things, a lot of our public is concerned that we're going to descend into have a steep descent into a cookie cutter type of city. The third item is a little bit out of the box, and I don't think it's on many people's radar, including our city's radar, and that is to take a little bit more active role in what the city can do for public transit within our city. In other words, it's not an actual city asset, but the city somewhat controls the asset of public transit by especially the facilities such as the bus benches, bus stops, and stations, and also provision of information. That's something where we could, at low cost, increase how the public can switch over and not impact our roads so much. And so even if dollars can't be found for any of these issues, I'd still like to see them on the priority list so that if things do come up, there can be some kind of benchmark at which we weigh these issues that are of concern to the citizens of Fullerton. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Anyone else wishing to make a comment, please come up.
Mayor, City Council, Curtis Gamble, activist for the homeless. I've sit here and I've enjoyed listening to you guys about the budget. I think what you guys were saying, it sounds pretty good. I think that some of you are new, so I think that the future is going to be important because it's a great opportunity to work together to make things happen that the last council members didn't make happen. So you have that opportunity to guide, to be the future and make things happen. I'm also want to give a little input about OCTA as far as your budget and everything is concerned, your streets and everything else. OCTA wants a streetcar up and down Harbor Boulevard. I used to work for OCTA for 14 years. They have lots of money. They're willing to work with you to help you build your city, but you have to work with them to help them build their transit. So that's very important to look at that. There's lots of money at the Disneyland area, which a streetcar would bring the Disney people up here. I heard Councilman Czar mention tourists. Tourists is really how you make your money. The other thing is emergency shelters. You haven't really included that in your budget. Judge Carter have asked you many times, each city. So until we make this emergency shelter thing happen, everything else that we do, we're going to have homeless people all around, increasing the costs of what we're trying to do, everything from the police officers to just the regular local business. So you have to take care of your responsibilities. The Rancho La Paz Mobile Home Park has asked for your help. That would be a good group of people to work with because the county and Continuum of Care Board, which I'm on, we have lots of money to make that happen. As a matter of fact, we have a meeting tomorrow. These boards, the county and the Continuum of Care Board, we have millions of dollars to assist Fullerton. So don't just leave them out. Come to the meeting tomorrow. I'm on the board. I would love to see your faces there. Other than that, you did a great job. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right. Seeing one more. All right. So these two will be the last two, or is there anyone else wishing to make a comment? All right. So these will be our last two.
Yeah, I'm over 50, so technology I'm trying to get used to here, so bear with me. There we are. Doug Cox, I live here in Fullerton. It's a pleasure to be here tonight, and just great stuff. I'm completing my research for my master's degree in leadership, and I'm doing studies, and gave my colloquium last week and passed it. So I really love research, and so I was interested in the surveys, but not a survey, and neither really a questionnaire. And when you look at research and you look at Likert scales, that's usually a scale of, of qualitative. Do you like something? Do you not like something? And it's the degrees in between. There's 5, 7, and 9-point Likert scales. This really gives you an idea, be able to take information that's qualitative and turn it into a quantitative look and be able to do analysis on it and really figure out the validity, because that is true, something that you want to make sure everything you're looking at is valid, that it passes some tests and some assumptions. Because right now, you're assuming. I heard we can't really rely on that study. I mean, it's great stuff, and it sounds great, but there's no scientific to it. We don't know about built-in biases. Internet surveys are problematic. You get groups that will come in and they'll oversurge and they'll be more represented than another group. So they're difficult. So I would say look at it, but at the same time, you've all lived here a long time. The atmospherics that you gather from meeting with the people and getting out there, it's probably almost as important as this questionnaire. So I implore you to keep getting out there, listening to your constituents. I don't think you can go anywhere and not hear about roads. I mean, you drive them. It's pretty evident that roads are going to be number one. So I wasn't surprised. But at the same time, there's other groups that have, I don't want to say other agendas, we all do, but they can be overrepresented. And then that slants your view, and then that slants what we're going to do and what you're going to come up with, even down to mission statements. That can change that. So I ask you to be careful of that. Another thing is, when you look at change, I didn't hear anything about the organization and organizational culture, because organizational culture, there's really 4 of them and that you can come up with. And organizational culture will tell you how quickly you can change or how slow or if you can change. So looking at it from an internal perspective will give you a better idea about how you're going to implement that change and how quickly you can do it. Because right now, you're a hierarchy that's slow incremental change. It's typical top-heavy or top-down hierarchy. You want to move to a market or an adhocracy. So a market, well, the Japanese do that very well with building cars. It's all about customer measurements and how the customer perceives and what they're getting and changing to achieve that. Anyway, I'm out of time. Thank you very much. I love this stuff.
I have a question.
Sure, ma'am.
What was your master's in?
Executive leadership.
And why did you come to the meeting tonight?
Because I love government and I love what Fullerton's doing. I love public discourse. Whether it's good, bad, or indifferent, it gives you a good flavor of what's going on. And I find that cities where you don't find people in the council chambers, they're not run well. It's not a quality city. The quality of life isn't that great.
Thank you for commenting. I appreciate it.
I appreciate all you do, and just keep on working at it. I love it.
Thank you.
Hello, Diane Venna. I just have a couple of quick comments. I wrote to all of you about the survey because I was very disappointed when I went to fill it out. It wasn't there anymore. And I agree with the speaker before me that I think there are a lot of other ways to let people know that you want our input. And so I think it was very limited by people who use the internet, who do email, and there's lots more people. I was suggesting to you in my email to put it in our water bill, or at least let people know more about it. The only people who knew about it are people who go on the internet or who come to the meetings, and there's a lot more people in the city who hopefully would give input. And I also liked what Councilman Zara said about rebranding our city, and it goes along with what Jane Reifer said, is that we have a unique city. We have historical buildings, historical downtown, and we have the treasure, as you know, that I love Coyote Hills. That can be a destination, just like there's Chino Hills Park, there's all these big parks all over different areas that attract people. That could attract people to Fullerton. That could be one of our destination places that people come to. So I would like you to have that in your policy statements, to value those kinds of things too. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor Silva. I apologize for showing up after you cut off the line. My name is Jane Rance, and I was listening intently from home. And I like the discussion that's been going on. But I would also like to support, actually, this new person, Doug, had suggested, that we get some better information from the community. And if you get information directly from the community, I know that when we elect people, it's expected that the people we elect are going to carry our concerns. But there are concerns that I know that when I talk to you people one-on-one will support. But when it comes to the politics, you can't always support them. And so we've seen things like trying to get our roads fixed, how we're going to do that. Having a survey to say how people do want to fund that, because people, they want them fixed, but everyone's afraid to say, hey, we're going to have a parcel tax. We're going to have a sales tax. Those things are not popular ideas, and it's difficult for you as council members running for election to have to make those decisions. So I think it might really benefit us as a city to take that responsibility out of your hands, really put it as a formal analysis from the public. We spend up to $70,000 for consultants to do work from time to time, $100,000. I don't anticipate it would cost any more than that. But it's really something we've got to get done. We have to find out how we're going to fund our roads. We did have an election on Coyote Hills and knew that 61% of the people wanted to preserve that as open space. I think we need to, that would be another thing that you could have in there to really get an understanding of what people do want, because there's this sort of reinterpretation of what people really wanted when they voted down that development project. Some people say, what people were promising them for voting no on Measure W wasn't what they really wanted. I don't know. I'm just saying that it might be a good idea to put this before the public before the budget cycle. There's obviously not time, but that'd be something that maybe put into the budget, $100,000, whatever it's going to take to get direct information from the public. Sorry, I'm rambling here. I'm just thinking that you all want to solve the problems, and maybe this kind of forum in a political arena isn't always the best way to solve problems. Thanks.
All right. Thank you. All right. With that, we'll bring it back to council for public comments or questions.
I have.
Mayor Pro Tem Fitzgerald.
I'll go ahead and start. I appreciate, Michael, your presentation, and Alan, your facilitation and that exercise, and thanks for the public coming out. We didn't get to talk much about Michael's presentation because we moved right into vision and mission and all of that. But this is supposed to be leading us up to our budget discussion. So I want to be real clear about what my budget priorities are for this year and for long term for the city. And I think I've mentioned it quite a few times today, but my highest priority is to fix our roads. I think we need to focus on a higher level of service. We need to encourage a vibrant and talented workforce. We need financial health and stability into the future. And we need a revitalized downtown. And I think that we have to, as Jane and I often disagree, but I really wholeheartedly agree with what you were talking about engaging the community more. And I think that moving forward, we have to work with the community to determine how we're going to achieve the goals that I really think we all agree on. And I would propose that the first steps in that are to charge our NRAC, our Natural Resources Advisory Committee, to study the infrastructure needs and the financial stability of the city, and to start to work on recommending a path to the City Council in that regard. And then I think we do need to add in this budget activities for scientific engagement with our community, to do a true survey of the people of Fullerton to determine what those palatable solutions are going to be. And I don't know if any of those things, when we would actually need to vote on those things. I mean, I would just encourage a discussion during our budget about budgeting money for the scientific survey, and some public education efforts in that regard. And then as far as having the NRAC committee, I'm not sure exactly what that committee is charged with dealing with right now and if they can handle that. But that has really been the proper place. Our Citizens Infrastructure Review Committee, which is in the past, as far back, I think, as 2001, done studies and made recommendations on financial solutions to our infrastructure problems. So I see that as a logical place to start.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor?
Mr. Zara?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I'd like to thank the staff and Mr. Roeder for working hard on this presentation, and also for the members of the public for coming out and giving some good advice as well. I don't disagree with Mayor Pro Tem Fitzgerald. I think our roads are. Should be a priority. But the way I see it, I mean, we have a lot of issues in our city. Homelessness came, I think, ranked in the top 5. And we have, housing crisis. And I see these all as a symptom, whether it's the roads or homelessness. It's a symptom of a greater economic problem that we have in our city, and I'd like us to start prioritizing looking at economic development in a very serious way, to start looking at how we can improve on our revenue and engaging. I'd like us to see build a team, an economic development team, and if we can't on the short term, maybe engage our Chamber of Commerce to be able to put together marketing plans and a strategic plan for economic development. We have to attract businesses into our city to be able to create good paying jobs that could help and prevent homelessness as well, and some of the lower income situations we have in our city. I think that is the root of our problem, is funding, it's money, and I see the solution being at least to start looking at economic development. I do agree that we do need to do better at engaging our community to participate. I think we do have a large Hispanic and Korean population. I see language often being a barrier, and that's why I think introducing measures like translation encourages people to come to council meetings and take part. I know in engaging with the community and talking with them, a lot of people do find it intimidating to come and speak, and often they say, I don't want to come and speak in public comment because I don't speak English. And I think we have to keep that in mind when we want to engage people. Also, I am a big fan of having a scientific background myself. I'm always a fan of scientific data gathering, and I think although this is this particular survey was done on a very short term, quickly, and it's fine. It doesn't really reflect anything different than what we already know. But going forward, I think having scientific surveys and maybe polls in localized areas, for example, if we are going to do a project in one particular neighborhood, maybe polling that neighborhood to see what priorities they have for their particular neighborhood. But I think that also one thing on heritage and being a destination city, we are a unique city, and I think we do need to start looking at our heritage as an asset and incorporating that in our marketing plans or in any economic plans that we have. So yeah, just thank you again for everyone for participating, and thank you to my colleagues as well.
Thank you. Ms. Flory?
Well, I also would like to thank Mr. Romer and Michael O'Kelly for putting this presentation together. It was very useful for organizing my thoughts. There's no need for me to reiterate what my colleagues have said because I am supportive of that. But Ms. Reifer also mentioned something that I think should be included in our objectives, and that is the preservation of our unique and irreplaceable assets, because Fullerton is rife with properties that are on our National Historic Registry, and I think that is an issue in this community that is one of the oldest cities in Orange County, and so I would like to see that included in some fashion in our objectives. But otherwise, I'm supportive of what the council and the public has mentioned, and I'm all for it.
Sorry. Thank you, Mr. Whitaker.
Thank you, and I want to thank everyone who provided input, questions, ideas this evening. Those who have been in person to do that, thank you very much. I think my comments would be fairly contained, though, within a couple communications. There are some valuable messages, I think, that did turn up in the stakeholder survey. And I want to refer to just a couple of them here that caught my attention. One is from the Fullerton Police Officers Association. I won't read the entire thing, but it says, an FPOA rep recently met with the owner of a newly opened downtown business and spoke to them about the process of opening a business in Fullerton. In summary, the owner said although the staff was very friendly, the actual process of opening a business with the city is not friendly and seemed to be a major setback for them. The process was so memorable that they even mentioned the city on their website. If you want to bring more money into the city, one thought would be to review the practices and procedures at your business registration office and your community development department. Now, I take all of this input as potentially constructive input, so I'm not really, I do appreciate the comments here provided by Fullerton POA. Another one which caught my attention, and I think this has to be one of our overall goals as well. It's on page 347, and it says, ideally, business brings revenue. With it comes capital. Using that capital will attract more businesses, which in turn attracts more residents. The city needs to address the problem of how we look when coming into our beloved city. Most people see the city through the lenses of their vehicle's windscreen. We see the streets the way they are paved, hardscape clean and graffiti-free, landscape the way it's manicured, and general cleanliness as the dress code for the city. Have you actually looked at the city's dress code lately? It looks tattered, frayed, and in general distress. Think of dress code as a job interview where you're looking your best to get your job, to get the job being able to attract more business. I'm only mentioning these things because I think it's important with where we're at right now. We've been in an extended period of economic expansion. But I think you have to, before you can walk, you have to crawl a little bit. We've been doing that. Then before you can run, you have to walk somewhat. So that's why so much of what we're focusing on is really the basics. It's really the core and the knitting of what we need to do as a city. Success and economic expansion is more a result of doing these other things well. And so I appreciate, again, everybody, this large set of ideas and inputs that were provided by members of the public and city employees and business owners and whoever else was aware of this short 2-week opportunity to provide this data. Thanks.
Thank you. And first off, I would like to thank the residents who submitted, who went online and did the survey. Thank you to all of you out there here at Chambers and out there in your homes. And another thank you goes to Mr. Roeder and staff, and thank you for indulging us and giving us this information. And I do like, just to reiterate a couple of things, I do like the idea of more engagement, and I think we're slowly getting there. It's become more of an emphasis. To do that, we had our Hunt Library AHA committee. That's coming before us shortly to figure out how do we proceed with the hunt. When you talked about dress code, the city, I think we've started that process with our plan to look to see how we can pay parking at night. That would help dress up downtown a little bit and make it more the dress code a little better. But I do want to see if we can involve our infrastructure committee in determining how do we proceed with what we all know it is paving our roads and figuring out what would be the best avenue for that. But on that note, is this item a receive and file? Or
There is no action on this
Okay.
file. What we will do is bring it back at a future council meeting. Any changes to the priority policy statements and a draft vision mission for city council concurrence. And then based on conversation and discussion, we'll bring back some items to include talking with the NRAC chair about potentially their role in looking at different items. And then through the budget process, look at trying to free up some money for some type of survey or some type of polling per the council direction, bring that back to you.
Perfect. All right. So with that then, the council up here, thank you for joining us tonight. And for you all here, thank you for coming by. And with that, we are adjourned. We'll see you in a couple of weeks.